I don't know how many people have had a chance to see what was published today, but at midday we had Jack's story is a big deal in my opinion.
Oh
If you
yeah.
haven't looked at it, you should. It has to do with William King Harvey, who was rumored to have been, or was said by a State Department official to have been seen on a plane to Dallas sometime in the run up to the assassination. I think it was in November of 1963. So the question is, what was he doing there? And this relates to that. So I guess the best thing to do is, Jack, if you do want to sort of, I mean, that's all the lead up that I'm going to give. But it's a great story. It's
Yep.
fabulous research, and we're very excited about it.
I'll tell you, when Jack first gave us the heads up about it, I was actually on my way to see Luna. And when I showed her the memo, it was like a bomb went off in her office. I mean, people were pissed off that the FAA, like we're going down this rabbit hole and we may have another whole place to look. So anyway,
And
Jack,
and
great
and we
article.
have aliases aplenty, so it could be
Yes,
real.
yes, yes, yes. Okay, Jack, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me on to talk about it tonight. Definitely a wild story, and I think if you go back, geez, what are we in September now? Sometime in the spring, I think it was on one of these calls when Jeff had asked, put out to the group, what does success look like out of the task force? And I had raised my hand and said something to the effect of like, it's not total success in my eye, but we need some kind of a mechanism to be able to get documents after the task force, closes up shop, because there are going to be things that we learn in the course of reading these 77,000 released documents that are going to have, second order questions
Hmm.
and open up doors that we didn't really realize even existed. And I think that's kind of the root of this story. I had
But Jack, can you give us your background first so people know who
Sure,
you are? And
sure.
it sounds like you have an interesting lineage.
A little bit. So I'm a data analyst by profession. That's what I do for my day job. I work in fintech. But my study of intelligence agencies goes back to my master's degree. I had studied history of international relations. I did my master's in Russia at Moscow State University, Lomonosov. So anybody who's familiar, that huge university building in Moscow, it's the biggest university building in the world. I lived in that for a couple of years, and I had written about the impact of intelligence information on political decision making during the Hungarian uprising in 1956. And so my focus ever since then has kind of been on that late Eisenhower period into the Kennedy years. And I do have a little bit of a personal connection. I've got some family connection. My grandfather was the director of information at the International Monetary Fund from 1948 to 1980, and a couple of, geez, I guess it's 4 years now ago, I was going through his papers and found a number of very weird things, one of which I would later learn was a backstopped birth certificate.
Mm.
And as I put that together and FOIA'd the CIA, and they gave me the Glomar response that tells you, we're not going to tell you anything, because if we did, then we would reveal the fact that he was a CIA asset of some
Right.
sort. And so, from there, I branched out. He had a cousin who was a special assistant to Eisenhower, worked under the National Security Council. So
Mm.
I have a pretty good expertise in that period, especially. My interest in the Kennedy assassination goes back to when I was 16 years old. I'm 41 now. I took a class in my junior year of high school. It was about America in the 60s. And one of the assignments we had was to go do as much research as we could and put together 5 pages on what happened in Dallas on November the 22nd. So there's no right answer. We don't exactly know what happened, but do the best you can. And
How
that
old
was,
were you when how old were you when the JFK movie came out?
I was 7 years old.
Okay, so you were kind of too young for that.
Probably college.
Yeah.
So yeah, my introduction was, I guess, the very end of the ARB period. maybe just after that. It was about 2000 when I was starting to get into it. And from there, I would read books. I wouldn't have considered myself a JFK researcher, maybe more of a student of the assassination. So yeah, that's basically my background. And then the reason why I went ahead and wrote this article, it kind of goes back to a few months ago when JFK Facts had put out the request for submissions. Hey, if you see something in these documents, write it up. If it's newsworthy, we'll go ahead and publish it. And I thought that was a great challenge. It was a great opportunity during the summer to dive in and see what I could make sense out of. And I had taken Jeff's course on the Oswald file. So out of that course, aside from just like the general knowledge, I learned how to critically read CIA documents in a way that I didn't before. How to connect dots, how to, every little thing, every slug, every CC on a memo is really, really important. And so from there, the genesis of this article was I looked through the document that Jeff sent out as like the guide for, here's basically what we're looking for. Here's how to write it up. Out of the list of topics that were kind of like the top, things that the readership would be interested in, I latched on to Harvey because I knew the most about Harvey. So I wasn't going to have to do a ton of background reading to make sense of anything I found. And also he was CIA, and that's kind of where my research has always been. Like I'm not as strong in the military side of it or in the FBI. The CIA is kind of like my area that I know pretty well. So once I had a topic, somebody who I wanted to look for, I went to JFK Diffs. There are a few different websites for that, but I started, my thinking was, and I think this ended up proving out to be a really helpful way of doing it, is JFK Facts is about what is newsworthy with regard to the assassination. And if I was going to, in any sort of timely manner, figure out what is news or what is new in the documents, I needed to be able to isolate that quickly. And having those files where everything that is new is in red is really, really helpful. Now, it's not, it's not searchable like Mary Farrell is. So you can't do all your work there, but it's a nice starting point if you use the metadata in the spreadsheet. I use that to search for anything related to like Harvey or Task Force W, and I was able to pull together some documents related to him, and then I just started looking for the red. And when I saw the red on the FAA and I saw the name Charles F. Niles, I'm like, whoa, okay, this is something. But what is it exactly, right? Okay, we're pulling in another agency, but what are the implications of that? And that was my launching point. And from there, it's Mary Farrell, it's Crest, it's Crest's CIA declassified stuff. It's go through genealogy, use ancestry, who's traveling where under their own real name that's actually been released. What can we learn about the different players in this saga? What's already out there? There were releases in 22 that, and 23, and you go back a few years that not everybody's put those all together. So a big part of this article was the aliases. It's separate, but it's also really important. Jeff talks about fact patterns, right? And you can see these two fact patterns, they're working sort of in concert with one another. And if you put yourself in Harvey's shoes, I don't know what he had to do with the assassination, but I do know that he was moving around in some interesting circles in 1963, and he was a very security-focused individual. And if you're going to compartmentalize your travel, then you want to spread that paperwork in as many different ways as you can, under different names, under different agencies, different accounts, little things like, is it Task Force W or is it QJ Win? How is he filing paperwork? Really fascinating stuff, the way he would move things around on different expense accounts. So, that part of it, I think, we try to, if you read the article in its totality, I think that's a really key aspect of it, is that, little things get spread all over the place and come together into a bigger whole. I think another very interesting part of the overall article was kind of, we got this front row seat into, what goes into creating an alias in the William Walker stuff, right? So he has these two different aliases in the same name. They tell the church committee, hey, he used it up until he went to Italy in June. Okay, true, but not the full story. And this is another like key lesson for anybody who's going to dig into CIA stuff. Take them exactly precisely at what they say. Don't assume anything, because they lead you to believe like, hey, okay, he's not using it anymore. But no, he just said he used it until June. They make no comment about anything after June. And to see that they went and just immediately applied to do it all over again, to re-up them, was kind of shockingly bold that they would keep that secret. But again, it's that gray sort of pure, space that the CIA loves to live in, where it's like, we're not officially lying to you, but we're not telling you the whole truth either. We're basically answering the question you asked. And
Exactly.
so when you ask them questions, you have to be very, very specific about what you asked. I think you saw that in the questions that we put to the FAA. We were very precise about what we wanted them to answer. And those are tough answers. I don't blame them for not wanting to answer those questions. I really do hope they will, now that the article's out, come back and engage with us. And I know we'd be happy to print those responses. We waited for them, and we followed up multiple times to try to get their responses. So anyway,
Hey, Jack, for the people that are not conversant with CIA documents, can you explain, when you look at the August 1st memo, the name Harvey is not on there. So how are you able to link Walker, the name, with Harvey?
yeah, so we were tying this back in a couple of ways. We tied it back to the original document, the request, and just kind of worked from there to see, okay, they put in the request in June, and then it comes back later on that this is the fulfillment of the request. The August 1st is not, they don't put Harvey's name on it, but he signed for it. In the bottom right corner, it's his signature on it.
Okay.
So he takes delivery of it, essentially, of his aliases. And another interesting part, and we had debated whether or not we were actually going to call it out. I think we ended up pulling the line, but it's you can read it if you look at the document. He's instructed that because these documents, these alias documents, are not backstopped, they're to be used only for flash identification purposes. So if you're in an airport, sure, hold up your ID. Look, this is my driver's license, Will Walker. How you doing? But I read that to mean don't go and apply for a passport with it, because you're going to run into trouble there, because there's nothing behind it. It's thin air, right? It's essentially a forgery, right? It didn't come from any sort of official body. If you go back and you read closely Jeff's article about the backstopped alias for Joannides, Gebler, that went through an FBI liaison and actually went to the DMV, or whatever they call it in DC. That was an actual real document that was produced and is in a file there. That's not the case with Harvey. It's like, we just invented some documents and stuck your name on them. So another example of that is the birth certificate. If you were to go and look in the archives in Michigan, that's where the William Walker birth certificate is, there's not going to be a William Walker birth certificate there. Now, the difference is with a backstop, and this is what I learned with my own grandfather, they will, I can't say they do this all the time, but what I've found is that they will either borrow or merge identities. In my grandfather's case, they merged his identity with another man. They pulled both birth certificates out of the official files. So my grandfather on paper was never born. There is no way you can prove it. The man who was born on July 15th has a different name, but all of my grandfather's other information, except name and father's name. But that other man who grew up and had a very similar name and lived 10 minutes down the road, his birth certificate is pulled in New York. He was born in New York, grew up in New Jersey. But you can find his brother's stuff. That's fine. But those two birth certificates were pulled and the information was merged. And it's
They actually
wild.
take the birth certificate. They take the birth certificate out, and
They did in that case.
wow.
Did in that case, because it doesn't exist. I requested both the name of the alias and my grandfather's actual name, and my grandfather's isn't there. And then I compared the handwriting on the birth certificate, because back then my grandfather's the same age as William Harvey, born in 1915. They at least in New Jersey, the birth certificate was signed by the attending physician, and I was able to. I had a control in that my grandfather's sister was 3 years younger than him, 2 or 3 years younger than him, had the same attending physician. So the same man filled out her birth certificate, and the handwriting's different. And and they get all the information right on the sisters, but not on the brothers. And so, I had that experience with me as I'm sorting through this and knowing like, okay, they really just gave Harvey something to flash in the US. It was one more place to hide documents, Will Walker, and one more way to get a domestic airline, right? You don't need a passport for a domestic airline. So anything he did, probably fine back then, flash a driver's license. The FAA business was a whole nother account and a whole nother agency. Like the article says, never wanted that to be brought to life.
Can I ask something?
Can I just interject here? First of all, thank you, Jack, for a very lucid explanation of the story. And let me just say, this is a very cool piece of reporting.
Yep.
And as we say in the journalism business, it has legs, which means you can run with it for a long time. And this story has legs, clearly. It's very interesting. And I'm not going to give away, but Jack has a follow-up story about who exactly at the FAA approved this.
Ooh.
And one thing that we're understanding from this story is this was all going on at a very high level. And that's an important part of the story as well.
And
so
do we know how widespread this was? Like,
well, that's, one thing that we want to do is get the offices of the FAA administrator at that time and find out, were there other agreements about FAA credentials? I showed this to a friend at the FAA, and he told me, not just advising me, he said anything like this would have been decided at the very, very top of the agency. Those are very sensitive documents, and they would have to be cleared by the highest possible people. So we're going to get a lot more about this story. A couple of things that I tweeted out today, and I think I will add them to a post. Just looking at some other earlier reporting on JFK Facts, if you haven't seen the YouTube interview with C.G. Harvey about Bill Harvey, about her husband's views on lots of things, it's very revealing. She never gave another interview her whole life. And Harvey told her to destroy all of his records before his death. So that's very revealing. A second thing is that I think is very important for this story is the story that James Angleton tells in his congressional testimony about when Harvey was spotted with Johnny Rosselli in January 1963. And the timing is important because Jack's story follows right after these events. And here's what happened. Johnny Rosselli is being followed by the FBI everywhere because he's suspected in a dozen murders and he's a major crime figure. And they can't pin anything on him. So they're just watching him all the time to let him know that they know what he's up to. And so he arrives at National Airport. He gets out, he comes out of the airport, he gets into a car, and the FBI agents are like, oh my God, that's Bill Harvey driving the car, our former colleague who lately defected to the CIA. And so they call up Sam Papich, the FBI liaison to the CIA, and they say, Sam, Johnny Rosselli just got in a car with this CIA guy. What's the deal? Papich hangs up. He calls his CIA contact, James Angleton. And Angleton gets on the phone and says, what's the deal? Our guys want to know, why is Rosselli meeting with them? And Angleton gets rid of the whole thing. Angleton protects Harvey, okay? But at that time, and after that, Harvey understands he's being watched all the time, just like Johnny Rosselli. He needs more protection. And so a couple of weeks, within a few days, really, this request goes through. Can we get this credential for Bill Harvey so that he can and Harvey wants to travel more securely in the United States. Okay. So the timing of this earlier incident, which happened with Angleton, and Angleton describes it himself. So it's not made up. We know that it happened exactly that way. That's the context of this explanation of this story of why Harvey wanted these credentials, because he was being watched and he wanted to evade detection. So that's really to me, that's like the nut of the story and why it's so significant given what Mark Wyatt said, right? We don't know that Harvey went to Dallas, but we know now that he sought the capability to do it undetected.
Yep.
Right? That's the key to this story, and that's why it has legs.
Okay,
So,
can I ask a quick question that
Sure.
hasn't been asked in this particular conversation? But the two parties that are corresponding, Niles and Zubin, I guess it's expected that Nicholas Zubin would be an alias for a CIA officer, but apparently Niles is too. And I mean, I find that odd. Did you work that out early that this was also?
So let me just answer that question. Just doing some work today, we think that Niles is not a real name, and Jack can talk about how we establish that. But Nicholas Zubin, it appears, was an Office of Security. That's a real name of a CIA employee who worked on Task Force W. So that's quite possibly somebody who Harvey knew. And I think one thing that I would say about this related to what Jack just said was, this is soft fake ID. This isn't hard, this isn't backstop. This isn't hard. This isn't irrefutable, which to me, this looks more like a favor to Harvey than like, oh, we're doing some operation and we need to make sure that it's totally secure. That's kind of a interpretation of what's going on. But Jack's absolutely right. This is not hardcore secure fake credentials that like Joanides had. If Joanides got arrested for drunk driving and they checked, there'd be a story. Oh yeah, he lives in Washington. Howard, he's got this address in Washington. That would be a hard backstop story. They're not giving Harvey those kind of credentials. So that goes to your question about Zubin, Chad. But who was Charles Niles? That's where the story is going.
And Jeff, do we know, is there a paper trail for the request to the FAA, or you think this is a phone call that said, I need this?
Good question. Good question. I mean, based on what you see here, it seems certain that there would be FAA records related to this.
Right,
I mean, these credentials were sensitive. They're not given out to anybody. They're approved at the highest levels. They're not indefinite. Like, how long did Harvey have this credential? Yeah, that's the question. Is there a paper trail at the FAA?
And that's something that wasn't specifically asked, I think. And given how these people are very legalistic, we probably should add that ask, if it hasn't been construed that way.
Yeah, no. And I mean, what's interesting about this story is, who thought FAA would have JFK records? Right. And now it's like, yeah, they certainly did, and they probably do.
And how many? And if this was not like limited to Harvey, we have a whole new avenue of.
So this is, this is very promising. But maybe we take some comments or questions from other people about their reaction to this story, and has anybody relevant information about Harvey?
One quick question about the request of the CIA to the FAA. I think it was Zubin who authored the document, and he's asking the FAA to grant a credential, but he references a credential number. How did they have the credential number? Shouldn't the FAA have assigned a credential number? How did the CIA know what the credential number was?
It's a good question. It's a good question, which indicates that there had been some communications before this, right?
Right. Right. That's why
Well,
that's why I asked Jack initially, how were you able to connect that this is a Harvey, well, not the FA one, but the August 1st, but yeah, there's a credential number. I know there's a story here.
the FAA document, it's formalizing an oral conversation. If you look at it, he says, as we discussed, we want to put through this request formally, and you can use this if there are any questions about it. And that was an interesting part. Why is anybody going to come asking questions about Bill Harvey's relationship to the FAA? It's almost like they were anticipating someone would come asking questions, and we want you to have this documented on paper so that you can answer it.
As Jeff said, Bill now knows he's being followed.
He's had very recent personal experience.
Yeah.
Right. He needs cover.
Yeah.
To do what he's doing. Let's hear from Larry Hancock.
Jack, excellent. That's really, like Jeff said, this is really going to be important. I'm a little slow on the Walker alias. I think I follow you guys where you're going. I mean, basically, is this a credential as an employee? Is he going to carry something that says he is an FAA employee?
Presumably, but if you read it to the letter of the request, it's asking that their paperwork reflect that he has been issued the credential. They didn't ask for a credential to be physically issued, just that the paperwork reflected. And so I took that to mean, no, he's not so much walking around flashing an FAA badge, but if it's reflected in the paperwork, that opens up the avenue to expense accounts and to, filing papers in the FAA. So that part of his identity, part of his work can be under the FAA umbrella and not the CIA.
Anything about this credential program? Like, is it limited to pilots, like to employees? I mean, like, do we know anything about it?
Still learning.
From the quick work I did, there were 3 types of credentials. You could get a pilot, you could get a pilot's, an aviator's credential, you could get a traffic controller credential, or literally there's a credential issued to an aircraft. It's going to carry a number. But one of the things, the reason I brought that up, Jack, and this is just being kind of conspiratorial on my point, is if he actually had a credential, if he's on a list, my suspicion is he might actually be able to fly on an aircraft as an FAA employee on an open seating arrangement and not be listed on a passenger list. And if you want to talk about covert, just jumping on an empty seat. And from a couple of guys I know who worked in that area, they got pretty good favors, especially if he's carrying credentials. He can ride up front with a pilot in a jump seat, something like that, which adds a real, yes, I'm not only on this aircraft, I'm on it, and nobody's ever, I don't even have to have an alias. I'm just on the aircraft.
It's called deadheading in the
Yes.
airline business.
Yeah.
And if you think about it in the context of his recent encounter with Rosselli and how he got exposed, right? The FBI guys, how did they know Rosselli was coming in? They were looking at passenger manifests, right?
Yeah.
If you're deadheading, you're not on the manifest. So Harvey could be confident that there wouldn't be an FBI squad waiting for him if he was deadheading.
Yeah. And so one other comment and then one question, Jack. The comment is, I can't fathom. I'm spending a lot of time on Harvey now. I've been spending a lot of time on Harvey forever, it seems like. I can't fathom what is in his duties as chief of station, Rome, that would require this whatsoever.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
he's at a level now where he's a publicly visible CIA officer. At his level, we're not playing covert games anymore. Now, he might, as Jeff said, he might not want to be seen with somebody, but he's an open figure. There's no, you don't. One of the other questions I'm going to ask, and I asked Larry this afternoon, have we seen anything in Harvey's personnel file yet? Obviously, as chief of station, is he working under State Department cover? Because that would have been normal for chief of station. Do we know what his actual employment cover is as station chief in Italy is?
Based on the Angleton memo, I mean, not Angleton, but the, what's his name's, the 1961 memo, that's quite a possibility.
Well, Morales worked under State Department. Jeff knows who worked under State Department in Mexico City. This is just kind of routine. But what's striking me is, I mean, he's already got an employment cover under his name. Think about that. So he's already not got a non-CIA employment cover on his name. Now he's got another non-CIA employment cover under his name. So that's an interesting thing. But my final question is, I'm a little confused. I'm slow on this as to this William Walker. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I understand the cover, but is he carrying that as an alias?
So he's carrying it as an alias. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's for flash ID purposes only. And so it's sort of get out of a jam, but don't put anything on paper, don't apply for things. If you need to get through a line, if somebody asks you for ID, you can hold up your driver's license. I'm William Walker.
And the memo explains that they provide pocket litter as well. So there's a National Rifle Association membership card and sort of incidental things that would have the multiple instances of. So if you were stopped by a cop, and showed them something, it would look more plausible. So, but that's all it was pocket litter. It wasn't backstopped to anybody else who would say, yes, that person is William Walker.
Which actually can be dangerous in a way, because it recalls me, David Phillips got stopped on a traffic violation, and all he had is one of these flash IDs because he wasn't working in country. So he got a ticket, went into court, didn't have anything to pay it with, got locked up. And then I remember a letter to the, CIA, like, can you take this off my driver's? No, we can't. You were never supposed to use that. It's like, we told you not to use that. Actually, don't try to do anything with it. So anyway, that's the last comment.
So I can, a couple of comments on the last two questions. So I'll take the last one first. The William Walker alias. One of the things that came to mind was, I was thinking the same thing, like, how are you really ever going to use this? There's no way to really understand because it's a flash ID, so nothing's really on paper for his use. But the one thing that did come to mind is there is, I would guess, within the CIA files, a separate file that rolls up to William Harvey that is in the name of William Walker. And you see this in the OSS personnel file, so I'm guessing it's the same thing. And if you read the 201 document that came out, the church committee, and the final version just came out, there were a couple of redactions, but how a 201 file works, the alias files roll up to the master file. And so I could only guess that there are certain things that are hidden in the alias file that you wouldn't want in the main file. And so if somebody came looking in the main file, certain incriminating things, or even just for compartmentalization's sake, are in the alias file to spread things out. That's the first thing. The second, on the Rome question, I think there is an easy way to probably check this, and that's there's a Foreign Service catalog. You can find them online. I've looked because I've spent some time on William Colby, and Colby is listed in this, big, it's the whole thing the State Department puts out. They actually list everybody in there, and he's listed when he's the chief of station in Rome in the mid-50s as being a State Department employee in this guide. And there was an article, came out in the late 70s, I think it was John Marks wrote it, called How to Spot a Spook. And you can find it in the Crest, in the CIA declassified stuff. But he talks about exactly how to use this guide to figure out which people on the list are actual State Department employees and which ones are, political attaches, really CIA.
Let me just make a couple of points. One, and I don't have the book or the answer at hand, but what did David Talbot say in Devil's Chessboard about Harvey's cover? Because that would be an authoritative account that might resolve this question, because I don't have I don't have the answer. And on the State Department biographical register, it was called. I don't know that Harvey was ever in there, but that's a good question too to look at. So Dan Sigler's got a question.
The new book author.
Yes, yeah. I came across this the same memo from the FAA months ago, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Bill Harvey and how he might use it. And I guess my question is, of course, security and how the airlines operated back in 1963 was way, way different than we've envisioned it today. And so my question is this something he could have folded up in his suit coat, walked to an airline desk in an airport somewhere, presented that and said, if you have a seat, I'm on this plane.
Yeah.
And then if so, what would the airline do in response? Would they simply take his name down? Would they note it? I mean, and if Bill Harvey could do it, surely Jim Angleton could do it, and surely other people of influence in the CIA would have that opportunity. So I'm thinking that there's probably some fertile fields to be plowed in looking at similar cases that were not Bill Harvey that traveled like this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can I just make one quick point, just very quickly? I do think it's very interesting that the request is supposed to be retroactive. The request is being made in April to reflect that as of January 2nd, William Harvey is an FAA employee. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean Bill Harvey was moving around as Bill Harvey and then wanted somehow it to be reflected that he was an FAA guy? I mean, I don't know. I find that very intriguing. I don't know what it means, but
Yeah, no, definitely significant. Again, the timing of that, right around the time that Harvey goes to Florida to see Rosselli.
Yep. Yep. That is really, that's what Larry Hancock and I were talking about that. That's like a magical date time.
Right. So yes, that's definitely a significant detail. What it means, I think there's an FAA paper trail. I mean, and hopefully it's still around.
I mean, he had no business except for friendship in theory, right? He
Yeah.
had no business being in Miami, in Florida with Rosselli. And then didn't he talk to Morales also that time? Larry, is there?
I'll just jump in with this one last comment for Dan. What it reminds me of is David Morales was traveling with a friend. He had been in Phoenix, was going to go out. He had no reservation. He had no credit cards. They went up to the airline desk and he pulled out a card and flashed it at the desk and got on the plane. And Dan, that's what I'm really thinking about is maybe the CIA has an arrangement like this for travel. It's not no voucher, no money. It's a get on the aircraft free card because you're an employee.
Right.
Surely we can find that. Maybe. Surely, maybe.
Anything, Jack, anything else you want to add? Because then we can shift over to Steve Jaffe's.
No, I think that about covers it. I would just, as sort of a concluding point, say that it's been a really rich and fulfilling experience so far to get to work with the JFK Facts editorial team. So anybody who's, looking through the documents, if you spot something, go for it. Write the article, submit it. It's a great experience. Like I've learned so much working with, Jeff and Chad and the whole team. I mean, there must have been 5 different folks who read and contributed thoughts and ideas for how to improve the article. So it's been a great experience, and there's more to come. So
and you found real value in the DIF's website.
It's a great starting point.
That tell people about that briefly, Jack. It's an interesting research tool, and people who are interested in doing this kind of work, it's a kind of a complement to Mary Farrell. Just give people the URL and a quick synopsis of what it does.
Yeah, so for anybody, we talked about it a little bit at the top of the hour, but overall, I think it's like jfkdiffs.com, or if you just search JFK Diffs, it'll come up in a Google search. And it offers a couple of real value adds. One is when you actually bring up a document, it shows in red letter, because somebody wrote a script to just compare the 2025 version of the document with the most recent previous version. It will show whatever is new in red. And so you don't have to read the whole document to know what's new. You just scroll through it and look for red. And for me, in this case, it was FAA and Charles F. Niles. And that was immediately clear to me. These documents are not searchable though. So once you have your document, Mary Farrell is going to help take you a whole lot of other places because those documents are searchable. However, don't forget that on the JFK Diffs website, the spreadsheet, if you're like me, if you're a data guy, the spreadsheet is great because it's got full list of each documents with the metadata for each row is a document, and you can go back and look 2025, 23, 22. And so, for certain things, like some documents, they would be released and I might find them, but there wasn't a RIF number when it was released in like the 90s, and I'm trying to find the new version. And so I'm searching metadata for the date that it was published, or, things like that. You can piece it together. It's not a replacement for anything, but it works so well if you know when to use it and when to bounce back to Mary Farrell. In coordination together, they will save you a lot of time, and you can find a lot of information very quickly.
Hey everybody, I wanted to call your attention to one surefire way to deepen your knowledge of the assassination of President Kennedy. And that's to read my 3 books about the CIA, a trilogy of spies that tells how the assassination actually unfolded in the eyes of CIA insiders. You see, my work on JFK's assassination is rooted not in the literature of conspiracy, but in the history of CIA operations. And that makes all the difference when it comes to understanding the events that culminated on November 22nd, 1963. You'll want to check out my 3 CIA books that tell the story of the founding generation of the Central Intelligence Agency and what 3 insiders actually thought about JFK's assassination. Meet charismatic Station Chief Winston Scott as he surveils Lee Harvey Oswald 6 weeks before Dallas. Meet urbane CIA Director Richard Helms as he fends off President Richard Nixon's attempts to blackmail him over JFK's assassination. Meet James Angleton, the ingenious, paranoid, and sinister counterintelligence chief who had controlled the agency's file on Oswald since 1959. In these books, you'll see the real historical foundation of the events that led to President Kennedy's assassination, and you'll understand this event in a much deeper way. Check out my books at jeffersonmorleybooks.com. You can buy all of these books there, as well as my other nonfiction book, Snowstorm in August. So check out the Trilogy of Spies.